Along the northwestern edge of St. Louis's Calvary Cemetery, you'll find the section where members of the Catholic Order Society of Jesus are buried. And among the headstones that include the names of past presidents of St. Louis University, there is a memorial revealing a troublesome chapter of Jesuit history. It reads, "In memory of 3 slave couples, Tom and Polly, Moses and Nancy, Isaac and Susie, who accompanied the pioneer founders, and whose labor, not freely given, helped to establish Jesuit presence in the Midwest. In other words, the couples were forced here by the clerics who owned them." This certificate, stored in the Jesuit archives, dated November 21st, 1822, is a manifest of human cargo from the Roman Catholic clergyman of Maryland to the Reverend Charles F. von Quickenborn of Missouri. It lists the same 3 couples who were the first to arrive here at the behest of their new masters. More enslaved followed by birth or purchase, and their numbers eventually grew to at least 70 people held in bondage by the Jesuits across the St. Louis area. And across the province that encompasses Missouri and several other states, the number of enslaved, either owned or hired over time, was closer to 200. Now, in a moment, we'll explain how this all unfolded. First, meet a descendant of the enslaved. We first met her in June of 2022, right here at Calvary Cemetery.
Family. They own the bones, but not.
This is Robin Prouty, founder of the nonprofit organization Descendants of the St. Louis University Enslaved. She joined relatives and friends at a ceremony to dedicate a headstone marking the grave of her great-great-uncle, Sylvester Chauvin. In the early days of baseball's Negro Leagues, Chauvin was captain of the 19th century team, the St. Louis Black Stockings. He was a talented musician from a family of musicians. But more important to Robin Prouty this day, Sylvester Chauvin was born to a woman enslaved by St. Louis Jesuits. Her name was Henrietta Mills Chauvin.
I have been the person in my family who was putting together our family tree on a genealogical website. So I knew about Mother Henrietta because I found her in the 1880 census. But after that, I was stalled because I didn't know where she came from.
Prouty didn't know until she received a letter containing the answer from the Society of Jesus. In 2016, the Jesuits did some genealogical research of its own to track down living descendants of slaves the order owned. 3 years later, Prouty was contacted. The efforts are part of an ongoing initiative called the Slavery, History, Memory, and Reconciliation Project. We reconnected with Robin Prouty in May of 2023 after she moved back to her native St. Louis from Maryland. We continued the conversation about what happened after she read the letter about her great-great-great-grandmother.
They said that they had her communion record and then her marriage records. When she was 15 years old, she was allowed to marry Charles F. Chauvin. On the record it said, Charles F. Chauvin, slave of Amanda Curtis, I bequeath to you in holy matrimony Henrietta Mills, a slave of St. Louis University. So when I saw that record, it just opened up a whole new chapter for us.
Knowledge of these records allowed Prouty to reach back farther in her family tree to Henrietta Mills' maternal grandparents, Proteus and Annie Hawkins Queen. They and other members of the Queen family were taken to Florissant, Missouri for the purpose of building and maintaining a mission and a farm. St. Stanislaus Seminary Urshan stands empty, but the limestone structure is listed on the National Register of Historic Places.
You know, when I think about that, how they had to carry those limestones and how they had to work and build this building, and it's still standing today. It is a testament to our ancestors, and we want them to be acknowledged.
So the way I actually met Robin was I was helping at an archaeology dig on the eastern shore of Maryland at one of the former Jesuit plantations where we had enslaved people.
Brother Ken Homan of the Jesuits' Midwest province began learning the extent of the order's ties to slavery as a graduate student.
Part of where it came in for me is my own research looks at the history of the labor movement in St. Louis and the Catholic Church. And a number of the Black Catholic parishes were formed by people who were either freed before or after the Civil War. And some of them were the families of those that we Jesuits enslaved.
What do you think the rationale might have been, how the community, the Jesuit community, could reconcile holding other people in bondage? I know I'm just asking you to speculate on this. But
yes. Yeah, so I think there are a number of things at play here. So one of the things that happens for the Jesuits is they early on decide whatever culture we go to, we will enculturate. We will take on and adapt to that culture, especially with the elites of that culture. And that will be kind of our entree or foray into that space. And I think they said, well, slaveholding is the common feature here. To be honest, I don't think we did an adequate job saying, should we be doing this? Even to the point that we got letters from Rome, from the head Jesuit offices in Rome saying, you all need to really question what you're doing here. This is too much. We entered it because we said, like, well, this will give us access to society. I think, though, at a certain point, we as Jesuits said, well, it's easier.
Enslaved people were also forced to labor at St. Louis College, now St. Louis University, in addition to several regional schools, churches, and missionary outposts. Robin Prouty shares what she's learned through lectures, panel discussions, and a variety of programs in the community. Here's what else Prouty shared with us about Henrietta Mills and her family. Henrietta's husband, Charles F. Chauvin, fought in the U.S. Colored Infantry during the Civil War. He was drafted as a private, but within a year was promoted to sergeant. His name is among those listed at the African American Civil War Memorial in Washington, D.C. Charles and Henrietta Chauvin had 10 children. Sylvester, the St. Louis Black Stocking Star, who was also a professional brass musician, was the oldest. The 8th child, Lincoln, was a guitarist who also worked as a driver and laborer. He was Robin Prouty's great-great-grandfather. The youngest sibling, Louis, had the biggest reputation in music circles. He was a ragtime player and composer who performed with Scott Joplin. The pair even wrote a tune together titled Heliotrope Bouquet. Not far from Sylvester Chauvin's grave in Calvary Cemetery is his mother's final resting place. Henrietta Mills Chauvin died in 1905, and her grave has no headstone. That's a situation Robin Prouty's organization, Descendants of the St. Louis University Enslaved, wants to make right.
We have several legacy initiatives, and that's one of them, to make sure that our ancestors are properly buried, to provide them with headstones.
For Brother Ken Homan's part, he's developed educational materials to explain Jesuit ties to slavery and why it's relevant today.
The stories of the enslaved persons are the stories of then free Black people here in St. Louis and free Black communities. It's the story of Mill Creek. St. Elizabeth's Parish was largely populated by people who had been enslaved by the Jesuits or adjacent, and then their parish is demolished in the name of expanding 2 universities, one of which was ours. And so I think that long legacy is what I really wanted people to connect with.
St. Louis University hasn't been operated by the Jesuits for some 50 years and is controlled by a lay board of trustees. A university spokeswoman says a series of discovery meetings with Robin Prouty and her organization have already taken place and that a standing committee will be formed to determine next steps. It is a story, as they say, to be continued. For Living St. Louis, I'm Ruth Ezel.